Welcome to the Offer Letter Podcast, the place where real career coaches and HR professionals prepare you to answer job interview questions. I'm your host and interview coach, Michael Manzano, here to help you get your offer letter. Today's question is, tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker. Now, conflict is everywhere. It could be at your grocery store, at your work, in your family, and on your team. So how do you deal with conflict? And this is a tricky question because do you talk about that time where you yelled and maybe cussed out a coworker for spilling that drink? Or maybe you're the one that spilled the drink and it was your coworker that was yelling at you. What do you say to someone who might be your future boss? So to help us better understand how you can talk about conflict is my friend Arlena Alcock, who is a career advisor with our team here at the college. So Arlena, welcome to the show. It's really awesome to have you here today. Arlena, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Michael. Thanks for having me, and it's really exciting.
This is exciting. Okay, so Arlena, why don't we dive right into it? Why don't you tell me, why do recruiters ask this question? Tell me about a time when you had a conflict with a coworker.
Well, Michael, there's a couple of reasons recruiters ask you about this question. They want to know more about how you handle interpersonal conflict, and they want to know if you have a strategy to deal with your colleagues when you have differing opinions. They also want to know that you're prepared to try and solve your problems by yourself first before you go straight to your manager. Your manager should sort of be your last resort. You should try and solve things that you're together before going to the top.
So kind of like the playground growing up. Are you able to deal with it, or are you going to go straight to the teacher and tattle on this kid? Huh?
Bosses don't like it when you go to and tattle on your colleagues right away, especially with little things, day-to-day things. They really want you to be able to work things out on your own if at all possible.
So let me ask you this. Is this question a red flag about the employer?
Is it a red flag about the employer?
Yeah, so them asking, how do you feel about conflict with a coworker? Should it be a red flag, and should you interpret it as there might be lots of conflict at the company?
It's hard to know. It could be a question that you could ask later on when they ask at the end of the interview. They often ask you, do you have any questions? You could ask something like, what kind of conflicts and challenges are commonly, had by a person in this job, to find out and go a little bit deeper about what's going on in the culture of the company.
So why don't you give us some tips and tricks on how you can answer this question?
Well, there's two scenarios I see at Bow Valley College because I work with students and new graduates. There's one group of students who really haven't worked at all, or have very little work experience. And so when we practice that question, they often say to me, I don't know, I haven't had a conflict because I haven't been at work. And then there's another group who maybe have had some pretty serious conflicts, like you said at the beginning, maybe where there was even people were really upset or yelling and it didn't go very well. And they need to know they probably shouldn't share that conflict. The worst thing that ever happened to them probably isn't the right story for this as an answer to this question. So going back to the first group that doesn't have very much work experience, I recommend they think about an interpersonal conflict or a difference of opinion that they had in a group project at school. So sometimes that happens when there isn't really a teacher, anyone there to kind of moderate the behavior. You have different ideas of how a project is supposed to go. How did you resolve that, or how did you come to a conclusion with that? Or in their sports or extracurricular or volunteer work, maybe there was something there. Employers are also looking to see how you strategize. Sometimes it's not about having this dramatic workplace conflict story. It's just, how do you think quickly on your feet? So if you've really never had any workplace conflict, you could say that. You could say, I'm just graduating. I've never had a conflict before, but if I did, I would do this. I would definitely sit down and talk with the person and try and work it out. And if we really couldn't, then maybe I'd go to my manager. So they just want to know that you can think on your feet and come up with a strategy. So those are two tips that I have for the person who hasn't worked a lot. The person who has the more dramatic story, I think, going and talking to a friend or a career advisor at your college or someone that you know that has worked a lot more that you really trust, and saying, what kind of story or conflict should I share to answer this question? Because I had this really dramatic scenario. It keeps coming up for me. And try and find something that's a little just more of a differing of opinion that you could share with a good positive resolution. And that's more the way to go than to talk about something that really, really, truly upset you.
I like how you mentioned, talk about something that is more of just a disagreement maybe. Because when you hear this question, automatically, at least I think about it, and lots of people think about like worst case scenario. Oh, there was that time where I punched my coworker because they kept stealing my lunch.
Yeah.
Right? And you don't want to go into something like that. Would you agree?
I agree 100%. The word conflict means different things to different people, and we do tend to think of the worst case scenario. It really is just a disagreement or differing of opinions in this context. It isn't like a knockdown, drag-out fight.
Exactly. So, Arlena, why don't you give us an example of how you could answer it or how somebody could answer this question?
A great example was actually in my own life. I shared an office at one point in my work. And my coworker was a very chatty person, talked a lot about her. I'm a little bit quieter, a little bit more serious. And she was talking a lot about her personal life all the time. We just weren't getting any work done, to be honest. And so I'm like, oh, no, I'm not meeting my deadlines. I like talking to her, but what am I going to do? So I decided, that I'm going to take her for coffee and just share how I felt. I'm not making my deadlines. I really like talking to you. And she said she didn't know that I, wasn't meeting my deadlines and that I felt that way. And actually, she suggested that we work where we're supposed to be working and that we would go someplace different for lunch every day or for coffee and just share what would happen on the weekends. And I thought that was great. And we ended up going to different coffee shops and restaurants downtown Calgary and actually just became more connected. And it had, it was a lot even more fun actually working with her in the end, and we were both getting our work done. So that's one I feel examines all the different levels. It's positive, it's a differing of opinion. Person actually didn't know what was even going on. Sometimes people don't know, right? And everybody remained positive, and there was a great resolution in the end.
Yeah, and I like how you brought it all together, and that there was a happy ending to it. Right? You guys kept the friendship as well. You didn't hit her. No. You didn't tape her mouth shut.
Oh, my goodness, no. I think I should ask you what your conflict resolution question is.
Man, I would go worst case scenario.
Well, yeah, it depends where you're going.
Well, let me tell you, that's a good question. I didn't even prep for this question.
Well, so the problem with it when I work with students is nobody wants to think about their negative experience.
Yes.
It's not something they want to talk about. I work with people from, in particular, a lot of other countries. And that's a very confronting question, and it is not something that would be asked in their experience, right? And they don't want to even go down that road and talk about it. It's a very difficult question if you haven't been, born in the country and kind of used to that. So this is a very common question for someone who has been working a lot in Canada or as a local person. As someone from another country, it's quite a shocking question, actually.
Yeah, and it is actually pretty important because you think it could be with a coworker, it could be with a customer. It could be with a manager, could be somebody that is your direct report if you're trying for a manager position or supervisory position. So there's lots of different levels that this way could go. Now, I got an answer for you. So here's my example. So back in the day, I was interviewing with my manager for a position, and it was about the same level as I was going to be in. This was for a career coach. And we had a difference of opinion on who we should hire. So what I did is I talked to my manager, told her why I went with candidate A. She told me why she went with candidate B, and then we went with the pros and cons on different things on why we should go with each candidate. In the end, I mean, she was the one making the decision, so I would have to just defer to her. And I told her, you know what, either way, I'd support who you would go with because both are great candidates. So in the end, she went with her candidate B, but it actually worked out really well. And funny story is that eventually we actually also hired candidate A. So we got both of them. But it shows that, we were able to work things out. That wasn't even a bad disagreement. We weren't like arguing about, oh, I have to go with this person. You really need to decide on this person. It's my way or the highway kind of thing. But we were able to come to a nice conclusion, be able to amicably be able to professionally, let's say, come up with the right decision. And it worked out in the end for everybody.
That's a great example.
Thanks.
Thinking things through in a lot of different levels with actually your manager, which is sometimes hard for people to do as well, to express their opinions to someone in an authority position.
Arlena, thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
It's a lot of fun. We don't usually get to do these things. So
No, this is great.
It's great that you're able to come in. Really appreciate you doing it. And you know what? It's always good to practice. So if you're listening to this, make sure that you practice a question like this, because you never know when this might come up. And this could be something that's surprising. And when you're nervous already at the interview, you might already think, worst case scenario. So if you practice, you'll know and you'll have something prepared that it's not the worst case scenario. But it could be something like a disagreement. It could be something not as bad. Everyone, thanks so much for joining us today on the offer letter. Tune in next time as we go over another interview question so that you can get your offer letter.